Hi, Laurin. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Welcome back to social media. How's it been treating you?
Oh my gosh, it was so nice to be away, but I can't live like a hermit forever. So uh, it's been good, and it was ironic because I knew we had scheduled this, and then the other girls on the team for our team page, they had scheduled for me to like do like a story takeover day on the team page. So I was like, all
Yeah.
right, I officially got to be back on this week.
Was it two weeks, right? Or 3 weeks?
It was three. So
3 weeks.
last year when I did it, it was four. It was like 4.5, I think. So I was like, okay, I can't do that much this time. But it's definitely something that honestly I really encourage anybody to do, just because it's so. At least for me, it's something that can be really hard to regulate, and it's just sometimes having that complete, like, just telling yourself, like, I'm not doing this for this many weeks. Is what you need. It's not just putting stuff out; it's also consuming. And that's really a big,
Totally.
even if we're like, oh, I don't want to consume this. Like, you still grab your phone, you go and you look, so.
Totally. It's right. It's spot on the topic that I wanted to discuss with you and with you in particular because I've seen your stories. I like a lot your content. And something that really resonated with me, I think it was Monday that you shared about it. How social media creates like boundaries for your own personality, right? I think you were talking about Instagram that it doesn't like going beyond a niche, a certain niche, let's say fitness, let's say whatever it is. What happens when you start posting about, I don't know, something artistic, something about mental health? It's like you get less views, you get less of everything and kind of hits your mental health, I think.
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One, like I mentioned in that, I think that it's not just, I mean, Instagram itself as like the platform, the algorithm, all of that, that's completely separate. I'm not going to touch that, but that does reward a certain thing, right? But even just the people on social media, right? They come on and they're like, what does everybody say? Hey, somebody comes to your page, like they need to know what you do, who you are, exactly all these things, fit into this, that, and the box. Like, little captions say about you. What are your last few posts? And it's like, most people are so much more than that, right? Unless you're like a purely educational page, or you're purely like, hey, I'm just sharing this type of stuff, right? Then that makes it a little bit easier. But if you're trying to say like, hey, I'm building a personal brand, or I'm sharing a lot of different things, it's like, I'm a multifaceted person and I enjoy sharing lots of different things. And so it definitely can be really frustrating because you feel confined, and then like you said, you almost feel like you have to create this persona for it. And actually, it was so weird.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this, and there's this really great, I really do not consume a lot of YouTube. It's just not really a platform I've ever really enjoyed, but there's a really great channel called After School, SKOOL, and they do a lot of kind of like,
Sure.
yeah, After School is great. And they had one on there, and I don't remember the title of it, but it's one of the newest ones. And it was like something about how basically the audience can create this person, right? Because it's always like more, more, more. And they use this example. It was really sad. It was like this young kid, he used to share, about veganism, and like, I think it was like violin and whatever. I don't know. He was sharing his own personal kind of stuff. And then he eventually tried to stop doing that. And he started doing the mukbangs, like where we eat on camera. Those obviously got views. And then people would be like, go do this, go do that. And then now this guy is like morbidly obese. He doesn't, like, all he's done now is create these like crazy videos. And now it's like, is he only doing that just to fulfill this like desire? Because people are always going to ask for more. And when you don't have that like center for yourself, then it's going to be really easy to just say, okay, well, I'll do whatever is next. And for some people, that might be like an innocuous thing. But for other people, it could be really detrimental to either their physical health, like in this guy's case, and then also just kind of like, who are you? Like, you look up and you're like, am I only posting things because this is what people are expecting? And is this
Totally.
genuine to me? So there's like a lot that goes to that. So it was this break gave me a lot more clarity on that. And, some of my, I know some of my resistance with social media is on that, because it's like, I want to be able to post stuff. And then ultimately though, it's like, it's not, it's not about likes and all this stuff, but it's like, obviously you want to put stuff out that people are going to see. Like, you don't want to put all this time into something and nobody sees it. It's kind of like, well, then I'm just not going to post it. So I think that there's this weird, I don't know, thing to regulate. But yeah, there was a lot of reflection on that over the past few weeks.
Totally, and social media, it's a pretty weird thing in general, at least for me, because it allows me to connect with people like yourself. It allows me to share about fitness, about science, about meditation, but it also creates this persona, like you said, that can be detrimental and can really mess up your mental health. And I wanted to, if you allow me, to share my own personal
Of
experience
course.
about this topic. I was fairly recently diagnosed with both depression and anxiety. It was like a birthday gift. Totally uncool, by the way. But anyway, I wanted to make public about this stuff, this mental health stuff. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that. I'm a nutritionist, as we say in Mexico. But I wanted to be open about it because, as far as my experience goes, it's like you can share about your muscle gain progress, your fat loss progress, but when you start talking about mental health, about depression, it's like, I don't know. Do you wanna get attention? Do you need attention? Do you need a hug? You know, it's like condescending in a way. And I found that a lot of people identified with that. I got a lot of comments that welcome to the club. That a lot of people that I had no idea also have that same issue. And because what you share, what you talk about meditation, which I want to discuss with you also, in your own experience, do you think we give these topics, mental health topics, enough light in the fitness industry?
So I would say that there's definitely been an explosion of discussion around mental health, right? I mean, even just a few years ago, we were not talking about things in the way that we're talking about it now. Um, I think what's happened though is a lot of people who are talking about it, but there's not a lot of solutions.
Yeah,
Saying that you should just often give someone a solution for something that you're not working with, right? It'd be the same thing as like anything dietary, right? Like you're not going to be like, hey, I don't know you, but you should do this, this, and this. This is what your training program should look like. These would be the supplements you're taking. You would never do that, right? So the same thing with
sure.
mental health. You can't do that. But what I find in this space, this is my own personal lens, is that a lot of people are talking about it, but they're not doing anything productive with it. And then what happens is sometimes when we end up talking about this, we end up dwelling in it because there's no path forward. So it's like, okay, we've identified this, but now what? What are some strategies? Not just this is where things are at. So that's where I think the next thing needs to be. So I think that is certainly under discussed in terms of even with therapy, right? Like we have a team therapist who's on our podcast twice a month. And, the reason I have him associated with our team and on the podcast is very specifically, he's very direct. He's very empathetic, very sympathetic, is very provides things for people, right? It's not just like, well, just how are you feeling about this? It's like, yes, that. Now what are we going to do about this? Like, what are some strategies for you? And that's really what it comes down to when we're either talking about coaching or something with mental health, right? So I think a lot of it is there is a lot more discussion, in my opinion, but there's not enough discussion of how are we actually going to create strategies to work through this, or even just the strategy of, hey, like, finding someone who is, that you can work with in this capacity, because again, it is so hard to give general recommendations here. Whereas we can be like, hey, everybody probably needs to be eating around this much protein. Okay.
Right.
Like what you need to do for your mental health, I'm not sure. But there's a few physiological and psychological things that seem to work for a lot of people. So that's what I'll feel comfortable and you feel comfortable sharing. Okay, these are the things that we're going to talk about. Meditating, journaling, going for walks, setting a sleep schedule. The other thing, though, that I do think is under discussed, at least in the industry and just kind of in general, is there is such a connection. And I think that there is kind of a resurgence of this, but, it got so separated years ago when, we became very, very scientific that it was like the body does this, mind does this. And it's like, no, everything is going together, and then that can go down kind of a whole weird rabbit hole of like all of that. But once you start to really recognize those patterns and like how much your thoughts affect your physiology, that's really what, kind of opens everything up. So I think that we need to have more of a discussion of that, kind of like the yin and yang, or like having that, like, okay, there's the mental and the physical piece, and they're all like the emotional aspect is intertwining everything, and we really can't have one without the other. So that, in my opinion, is certainly under discussed in the industry.
Totally. And I think it's really significant in regards to the fitness industry because we're always pushing beyond our limits, whether it's fat loss, it's muscle gain. It obviously has an impact on on our mental health, and on our mind, and on our thoughts. But I think we can, it's just my opinion, we can do a better job just at least acknowledging that it has a toll on our mental health, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. And I think that especially depending on the types of clients that you're working with, are you working with a physique athlete who's pushing themselves to an extreme level just physiologically, which is going to create some psychological issues? Are you dealing with a client who's had 15 years of yo-yo dieting and trauma in their past? There's going to be a lot going on there, right? Like
Yeah,
it's one of these things that and even just anything that presents as extreme, there's generally something that's underlying it, right? And not to say there's anything wrong with being extreme, because there's not. And if you want to be at the top of it, that's the reality. But why are you doing this? How are you accomplishing this? So I think that there's a lot that we can do a better job of. I think that, in the fitness space, I feel like people either get so into it where they like are discussing things that maybe they're kind of talking out of their scope, or people just like don't even want to touch it. They're like, nope, I'm not this, so I'm not even going to talk about it. It's like, no, there's a way
yeah,
that we can bridge this gap. No, like neither of us are psychiatrists or psychologists, but if we have an interest in this and we have, client experiences and we are reading and researching these areas, there are certainly things that we can change and work with clients on their habits and their mindset. At some point, there is a stopping point where it's like, this is no longer where I can assist you. But I think that just not touching it and just saying, well, this isn't my role, that's not going to be useful. But also, again, it's kind of like as coaches, there's only so many things that you can effectively focus on. So I think that as a coach, you have to decide, what are the areas that I really want to specialize in? And if that's one of the areas, like that's certainly one of the areas that we focus a lot on, then I say that there is a line, there's a hard line that you have to know where you can't cross. But I don't think to say, oh no, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't help you with this. Like that's completely, that's negligent. There's certainly baseline habits and behaviors and mindset shifts that we can make with clients, that can really benefit their physical and mental well-being.
totally. I see that all the time. People that want to lose fat, but they don't compete. Okay, I understand. Why do you want to lose fat? Why do you feel fat? There's no such thing as feeling fat. Why do you feel that? Have you ever had therapy? Are you taking any medication? Things that I at least try to ask with every client I have, even if I'm not a psychologist, but I need to know these things because it's so easy to say, oh, but you need a caloric deficit. Every diet that works is because calorie deficit, blah, blah, blah. But okay, what does that imply on your mind, on your mindset, on your day to day? That's kind of the aspect that blows
Oh,
my mind that we don't discuss enough.
yeah, I think we're going to start to see a shift. I really do, because it's getting much more, just even within the past few years, just being able to weave in these principles. And people are even just clients in general are like interested in hearing about it. Before it used to kind of be like, what's all this? Now when I bring up stuff to people, they're like, hey, this is a little out there. Like, here's this different concept. Like, okay, they're like at least open. All right, I'll look into it, or I'll read this, or I'll do, so it's becoming much more mainstream. But like I said, I think that there's, as ever, when anything becomes more of the norm in the conversation, there's always going to be those extreme ends of either don't touch it at all, or hey, now we're just talking about it, but we're not really providing any strategies to support. So I think that that's where we need to kind of find that middle ground as practitioners to be able to do that. And that comes from, sharing content, and that comes from, educating yourself as a coach or an individual on the back end, reading, researching, listening, all those types of things. And that does not take the place of being a, licensed mental health counselor or a psychiatrist, certainly not. But providing therapy is very different than providing guidance on certain things.
Sure.
Again, like meditation, I don't feel like, oh, that's hope to talk about this. You know what I mean? Hey, this is an amazing tool that there's all these resources as to why it's great. Why don't we try to add this in?
Totally, and it's free, and that's a pretty cool segue because meditation, at least from a like an outsider thinking about meditation, maybe you think about the cliche, someone like this and starts to fly, I don't know, something like that, or that it might be religious that you need to take part of a cult or something like that. But there's research about it, and in particular, I have here a meta-analysis. It's fairly recently, it's from this year, that looks into mindfulness meditation and recovery from training. I found mind blowing that
Yeah,
these
send
things converse. I was like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's the meditation stuff really is like that was how I kind of got into it, right? Was because okay, now there's research coming out of it, just because that's how my brain works, or at least it did then. I was not as open then as I am now to things, right? Before I better hear about stuff. Now I'm kind of like I know how research works. Like once you've been in this long enough, you realize like there's a reason why there's certain studies that aren't done. Like there's a reason why things like it's just hard to do this kind of
Right.
stuff. So, anyways, back then I was like I'm not too sure about it, and there was this book I started to listen to. It was called like Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. Like it was this whole thing, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll get into this. And then my friend had encouraged me. I kept hearing about it, so my friend really encouraged me, and this was right at the time that Sam Harris had started Waking Up, which was the
Oh,
Waking.
I love that one. Sure.
So I was like, you know what, like I'll get in on this intro price, like I'll check it out. And they have, if anybody is not familiar with this app, they have they recommend, well, at first started it was 50, which was like a lot, but now they have 30 sessions that they recommend to get through first, and then you can start to do the other ones. So I told myself, well, I have to get through all of these in like one fell swoop. So I must have failed that. Like I must have gone through it 4 times before I finished all the videos. And then I finally finished it. And then now I don't meditate every day. I would say I journal more than I meditate. However, it's more about just being able to, again, like you said, you think it's like this, you got to sit and be like levitating off the ground. And it's more about
Yeah,
just,
sure.
you can meditate for 30 seconds. Let me like, of course, if you want to meditate for 2 hours, that's amazing, right? But if it's like, I'm just trying to be present and refocus my thoughts and refocus my energy, that's really what that teaches you. So I would say that I at this point, I still typically will use a guided meditation app like that. There's some music, like certain songs that can get me into like a meditative state to where I could be like sitting somewhere and almost kind of start to meditate with that. And then I also going, actually after this, I'll be going to a meditation class. So there's actually
It's really cool.
yeah, they have a meditation class. So it's pretty cool. She does like a guided meditation and all that. And it's, it's one of those things that it's like, hey, okay, I'm telling myself I'm going there for an hour. I'm driving there, I'm committing, I'm, paying, whatever. So whatever gets you to do it, that allows me to say, okay, I'm here for this hour. I'm turning my brain off, into this, off of everything else. And it's been really, really beneficial. So I really enjoy it. And I think there's just so many different ways to do it. Also, Aura rings. If anybody listening has an Aura ring, they have amazing meditation on the Aura Ring app. Which one of my clients actually told me about it, and I was like, oh, she's pretty into this stuff. So I was like, if she says it's good, it's got to be good. So I did a few, and they're very, very good, and they're split up into different ones. Like, are you trying to relax, focus, sleep, gratitude, etc. So there's so many different options, be paid, whatever it is, that can really this. And I think it's kind of like anything, just setting aside that time, and like you opened up with, it's not this, you're levitating off the ground, you're this like, this like monk who doesn't. Now you can go do that. People go to silent meditation retreats for a week and they don't speak and they meditate for 10 hours a day. Obviously that's certainly one way to do it, but that's not the reality for most people, right? And that's not something that you don't have to do that in order to get the benefits of it.
Yeah, I also started with the Waking Up app a while back. I think they had the 30 days. It was a free course introduction. Then I paid the
Yeah.
subscription. And I've been there ever since. I don't meditate every day, but it kind of opened up my mind to this possibility of meditating as something that you do every day in pretty much every activity. One of the ones I like to think about meditation, it's training itself. Maybe it sounds a little hippie-ish. I hope it doesn't.
No.
But as you train, let's say you go for a squat, right? You take a deep breath. The breath is always like the anchor that reminds you that you're there. You take a deep breath. You focus right there, because if you don't focus, what happens? The bars fall off, you get injured, whatever, right? You need to be present. But that also extrapolates. For instance, I'm a teacher. I'm a professor at the university. I need to be there with my students. I cannot be on my cell phone, which I oftentimes do, but I'm trying to focus, to meditate on what I'm doing. If I'm talking to you, I'm focusing on talking to you, on sharing experience, not judging, That's I think the most valuable things that I've learned from meditation, that I like to make a comparison with people in the streets, as you say, by walking. It's also meditation. if you see people in the streets, maybe my past self would judge like, oh, their hair or whatever, you know. But with meditation, let's say people are your own thoughts. You just look at them. They go by themselves. You don't call them. They go by themselves. You are free to interact. You are free to connect with one of those thoughts. If it's positive, if it's negative, we don't know. That's also one of the cool things about meditation. Let's say I see a girl, I talk to that girl, we get married. Like that can happen with my thoughts. I see a thought that says, you're not enough. You'll never be enough. You don't work enough. You need to do this and that and that and that. You know, this self-judging. If I identify with that, it's also the same thing, right? And that for me, it's what defines meditation. And what I've seen in your stories that you share a lot about the acknowledgement that we are not our thoughts, and that's been helping me greatly. And for me, it's so awesome to see someone like yourself that goes into the science, you're a researcher, but also into these practices that some people still think that are like, this cliche and stuff. But the practical application is what, man, it's been blowing my mind. And I try to share a lot with people that it's really just about that, to live a better quality of life.
Oh, you nailed it perfectly when you said the judgment thing, and that gets into Carl Jung and shadow work and all the different stuff, and it's so interesting how there's so many times where, especially in my past self, would have judged somebody very quickly for something, right? I would say that I'm probably by default, I have been a very judgmental person, and not something that I hold on to about people, but I'll just immediately make whatever, good, bad, indifferent, but just kind of will. And then once you start to have more experiences, either just in your own life, or just, reading, researching, going inward, you really start to recognize this is a part of, what is a part of them is a part of me. And just because I have not done this quite yet does not mean that I'm not capable. And so who am I to judge? Because I'm not in that circumstance, that situation. Now, obviously, things that everybody has a hard line of morality to them, and I'm not going to try to open that can of worms, but just in general, right? Just the kind of small, silly judgments that we would cast on people and other. I really think that, like you said, that you nailed it when you spoke on that, and just being able to be present in that moment it is everything. And I was exposed to some of this stuff a few years ago, like Eckhart Tolle and Joe Dispenza, and I'm like, oh, these people are fucking crackpots. I'm not gonna listen to all this stuff. And I was like, this is so, it's so funny. I was like, never. And now I'm reading the books, highlighting, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wasn't ready to hear that. You know what I mean? I was exposed to it, but I wasn't ready to actually understand it. There's a difference of when you read something, when you actually understand it and you can apply it. And that goes to the whole, what your thoughts are basically conditioning, your future, essentially. So I think that the method that somebody can go about this, there's so many different ways, right? Whether it is meditation through a guided app or a class or yoga or just deep breathing on your own or listening to something or reading a book or, journaling. I love journaling because I think that for people who are very, I don't really know the right word to use for this, but I'm always in my head and I'm always got a million feels swirling and twirling around, and pointless, and they oftentimes in our mind we make them up to be so much worse than they really are. And what I found about journaling is that I was able to just kind of dump things, and I was like, wow, okay, this was actually not a lot of things that I was really struggling with. It's 2 things, and I made it out to be so much worse, and now I have an actual logical path to get through this. And sometimes it also just allows you to get that out and be like, okay, I'm literally turning this page and I am done with this thought or this thought pattern or this situation that no longer I have control over or serving me. Okay, I'm literally flipping this page and I got it out. And then there's also the benefits of doing things like gratitude journaling and being very specific with intentions and all that. So there's a lot people can do with journaling. Something else that I do pretty frequently now is float tanks. I absolutely love those. Have you ever done one of those?
No, I haven't.
They're very interesting. So it's basically a sensory deprivation tank. So it's it's filled with a ton of salt water. So you're completely buoyant. So everything is underwater, your obviously eyes, nose, and mouth. And it's this pod that you shut, and there's no sound and there's no light.
Wow.
and the water is like kind of like body temperature, so you don't, like at some point you kind of stop feeling it, you know? And when I first looked into it, I was like, I'm gonna have a panic attack. Like, no way can I do this. And me and my friend were looking into it, and then he's like reading on the website, he's like, oh, it feels like you're floating in outer space. We're like, of course those people. And then literally it kind of feels like you're floating in outer space. But again, it's one of those things that you go in there, and now, okay, I've driven to this place. It's an hour of my time. I've dedicated myself to, I'm going to sit and work through a problem. And sometimes I work on that, and then other things come up. And then I basically just like let my mind open up and just kind of wander down whatever path. And sometimes it's pretty dark, not gonna lie. I'm like, whoa, this is
Sure.
this getting a little scary. But you have to open yourself up to that, because if you just hide that, then it's gonna come to the surface in other ways. So it's a really interesting exploration, and every single experience. So much to where I literally bought a membership, so now I go once a month. I'll do like a 45-minute sauna and like journal, and then I shower, and then I go and I do this for an hour. It's like my favorite thing I do every month. And it's just, again, it's creating that space for you to then say, okay, what allows me to have this space to then work through these problems, or just even allow myself to have this time to just let my mind go and let my mind think about these kinds of things.
Right, and I think after meditation, the waking up, maybe that experience gets a little bit different. That you don't, maybe you're afraid at first to go into those dark places because you don't judge yourself as much as you did before. Like, oh, that's not what am I thinking that? It's like you only see them pass, and that's what really keeps blowing my mind. That thoughts come by themselves, that they're not ourselves, but sometimes we identify so much with them that we can hurt ourselves. And I
Yeah.
can only imagine the first times that you were sensory deprived and all these things started to pop up. Was it scary?
Oh, it was super scary. So the first time I went in the float tank,
Right.
it was like, all right, buckle up. I don't know what's going to happen in here. You know what I mean? And there was like a little light in the back, right? And so my eyes are closed. I'm like, oh, I'll leave this light on. I know enough about light to know that like I can still see stuff, right? So I'm in there for about like 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay. And I was just like, okay, turn off the light. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't like enough. So I did that, and immediately like, I am just like, oh my gosh, like everything that I was worried about, I feel like is happening, you know what I mean? And I am just, it was not great. And but then I was like, stop. What are you literally afraid of right now? You know what I mean? Like there was absolutely, like there's nothing in here that is going to get you. There is nothing here that, like, at all. So just stop and just actually experience this instead of stop trying to run. Right? A lot of people, when they're met with things like that, they want to run, which is normal. You know what I mean? But so yeah, so that was scary to kind of sit with that, and then now I've kind of just, I don't know, expect it, understand it, and I'm like, all right, I might teeter on this edge of that abyss, and then I, you know, the whole thing though is just not to get stuck there. You know what I mean? Because then that's where people can get. It's hard to come back when you just are in this very dark place. Like I think being able to see it and experience it and feel it and learn from it, but then also being able to come out is really important. And this probably sounds very, very crazy and out there for some people, but if you've felt this before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it does.
I have my share of dark thoughts.
Yep. And honestly, I don't think that if I had gone into the float tank without meditating, that I would have really known how to do that. So I think I just gone in there and been like, oh, this is scary. I didn't get anything out of it. I was just kind of bored. But now, because I'm able to direct my focus a little bit better, still not great, but better, I'm able to get a lot more out of that. So I think that anybody is interested in meditation or any of these kind of practices, it is not something that comes really quickly or right away. Again, I think everybody has that kind of proverbial thing, like I'm just going to sit with my legs crossed and, you know, there's going to be an energy field around me and I'm one with nature. And it's like, yeah, that's probably going to happen the first time that you meditate, or maybe for quite some time, you know, and honestly, if I get like I don't know about you, but if I get like a 20 seconds of feeling like that, I'm like, oh, I had a great meditation session. Like, even if it's like a 10 or 20-minute meditation, I'm
Right.
not like at bliss the whole time. Like, it's not it. Like, I'm trying to get into it, and then I like may feel it, and then, you know, the whole point, like with all the brain studies that they found, is like when you're getting out of it, but then you get back in it, like that's where the brain changes actually start to happen. So it's not about the fact that you have to just drop right into meditation and then all of a sudden like you are this like amazing being and like the spiritual being. It's the process of trying to narrow your focus to stay focused. Okay, now you got defocused. Okay, refocus again. That process is what is helping to rewire the brain, and that might take a little bit longer for some people than others. And you know, it's like kind of like anything, right? But I would just encourage people, if you're trying, like me, like literally I had to do the intro course to waking up like 4 times before I even got through it. And then even now, you know, I might get 20 seconds of something. And but
Totally.
that's where the magic is really happening. And to your point, it's more about, you know, there is something to be said about the formal practice, certainly. And there's no denying that. But the whole point of doing this is so that you can recenter your thoughts outside of the time. I think Sam does a really great job of explaining that in his app. It's not just about like that session, about are you able now to go about your day, and like how are you operating, and how are you able to, you know, adjust your thoughts and be present and say, oh, I was thinking that. Okay, whoa, I thought that. Let me stop. Let me revert this thinking. Let me switch my perspective. That's really where the benefit of meditating comes from.
And do you think the practice on yourself of meditation has helped you with your clients, with client work? Let's say somebody tells you, "Oh, I've been having binge eating." They have the trust in yourself to tell you about these things. Maybe in training, I haven't been progressing. Okay, let's examine that thought, not the progress itself, not the binge eating episode itself, but the thought about it.
Yep.
Do you think that has helped you maybe be a little more empathetic with your clients?
I would say it has allowed me just to dive deeper into the real reason, right?
Right.
Real reason. It's really easy to look at numbers and spreadsheets and all that. And, you know, that tells a picture. Quantitative data is incredibly important, but what is the qualitative data saying? Because I can look at somebody's numbers and they could have hit that, but that doesn't mean that they had a good training session, or that they are recovering, or that they, you know, ate foods that were actually beneficial for them, right? You know, maybe they slept, I could see that they slept the right amount of hours every day, but they were sleeping at completely haphazard times all week, so their mental state is completely off, right? Like, quantitative data is incredibly important, but if we're only looking at that, we're only seeing half of the picture. So I think that by being able to examine these types of things and just be able to detach a little better as a coach, I've been able to get a fuller picture. Really, also just learn to ask the right question, ask better questions. You know,
Sure, sure.
and I think that's one of the biggest parts of coaching, is simply just asking and then listening, because people, you know, I could say, oh, client overrates it. Okay, well, there's probably 15 common scenarios that I know. Okay, this, you probably did it because of this or this or this. But that might not be the reason, and the way that the client is explaining it, that might just give me the whole answer right there. So I have to listen in order to hear that first. So backing up is asking the right question first, and then being able to coach from that perspective. So I think it has allowed me to ask better questions, listen better, have a more of a holistic approach. You know, I hate that word, but you know, there's no other word for that. It's a great word. People took it and
Sure.
then it's kind of like, you know, like all of this stuff, you know, some people have turned that word into I'm like, we want to take the word holistic back. It's not a bad word. I just like some people.
Yeah, it has that, I don't mean it as a bad word, but like a hippie connotation. Like, oh, damn hippies. But it's nothing like that, right?
Fun, but no, and there's nothing against that either. Like I'm not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The thing that I've learned through this process, I would say in the past year, just being more understanding with myself, others, and just more understanding. If the industry could do one thing, like, hey, there's 1,576 ways that we can achieve positive results for people. Why the hell are we arguing about that? You know what I mean? Outside of some detrimental stuff, which 99.9% of people aren't doing. Why are we arguing over this nuance, right? This might work better for somebody. This might work better for somebody. I am so much more open to different methods now. It's more what is actually going to work for the individual. You know what I'm saying? And I think that it is so, like, the bickering over these tiny things really just kind of fragments everything. Like, we're not moving people forward. There's so many people that need help and a general understanding of, like, nutrition, mindset, healthy habits, training, all of that. Like, and there's a million ways they can get there. Maybe not a million, but there's a lot of ways they can get there. So I've become much less judgmental of people's methods and their business models and all these things. So I'm like, if you're helping people, I'm here for it, you know. And not everybody's method is going to work for everybody. It's just not,
Right.
you know. What works for you might not work for me or my other clients. So sometimes it's not about that, you know. So I think that this has also allowed me to be more open in general with coaching, and I think that that is something that we are severely lacking as an industry, because everybody wants to be like, I'm right, this is my method. And like, yeah, like, there's certain things, I'm not going to lie and say there's certain things that aren't better than others. There are, you know what I mean? Again, I always use protein as an example, because protein, we pretty much know, like, all right, having this much protein around this much is probably going to be beneficial for 99% of people. Drinking water every day, probably a good idea, right? Like there's certain fundamental things that we can all agree on, but the nuance and how we all achieve it, I don't care if somebody's fasting this or not eating that, as long as you're doing this out of a way that is working for you and you're not doing it in place of, psychological distress, then I am not going to be judging this method if that's what's working for you. So I think that the arguing that happens within here with the industry is just so detrimental. But that's a side note. That's a
Totally agree. It's more of an ego battle to see who's right and who's wrong. And I think one of the fundamental things that maybe in the future we can see, it's mental health itself, and a really cool tool that we have on our disposal, which it happens to be free. It's meditation itself. That, okay, we have research that it can be applied, let's say, to pain management, let's say to eating behaviors, let's say sleep, mental fatigue. Why not use it? Why not jump off this wagon of thinking about it? It's a religious thing, which is not bad on itself, but I know it can be a little barrier. But it's nothing like that. It's knowing the nature of our thoughts, which is really weird to say, because I don't even know how to define a thought. But I think you get the idea. That
yes.
it's just looking at your thoughts on themselves, which totally applies to training, to nutrition, to all of this.
It applies to everything, and it ultimately applies to the fundamental motivation as to why the client is choosing a certain goal. And if they
All
can't
right.
do that, they're not going to be successful no matter what program. We could give them the most optimal, perfect program. But if somebody doesn't understand the fundamental reasons as to why they're doing something, they're not ever going to be successful. And they will hop from program to program, and they will never be satisfied and never be fulfilled with the changes that they're making until they actually get to the root of that. And that is something that, as coaches, and people who are providing content, like, we can guide people there, but ultimately the client themselves and the individual themselves has to make that decision. And it's until you, like, I can't, like, we could be saying that, like, I could say, like, 2 years ago, I could have said this to you and you'd be like, okay, cool. But until you've gone through, right, until you've gone through this process, or even like me, like a few years ago, I'm like, oh, Joe Dispenza, who's this quack? Like, he's not a quack at all. Like, people can disagree with
Totally.
totally fine with that. But the fundamental ideas of, like, you have to go and do this work for yourself. We can, guide people there and share more about it. But ultimately, people have to make that decision that they want to make those changes and recognize those parts of themselves and sit with those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And that's not fun. But there is, I don't see any way around it. There's no pill, there's no class, there's no way to supercharge this. Like, you got to just do it. Like,
Right, it's like training itself. Nobody can squat for you. Let me do those set of squats for you, and then you get the big quads. Well, if you don't sit with your uncomfortable thoughts, you dissociate from your uncomfortable thoughts, knowing that you are not those thoughts until you do that, right?
yep. Yeah. It's fun. It's cool though. I think and it's a journey that takes a long time, but I do know that the people who live by these principles, the more people that I can recognize who live by these principles, I'm like, oh, that is how I would like to live, or how I would like to feel about things, or how I would like to act myself, and I think that sometimes you just have to see that as well, and that's a big part of it, because we people that you're surrounded with, good or bad, you know, you kind of take on those traits, and sometimes we
Totally.
don't realize what we are seeing or feeling or experiencing until back, or until we're like, oh, you know, maybe that's not sitting right with me. But you're like, well, I've known them forever, so it's fine. It's like, well, okay. But is this the type of pattern and behavior that you want to like express? Is this how you want to speak to people? Is this how you want to do things? And then you have to make those decisions as to how you want to live. I don't know. I feel like there's like everybody hits this point at different times in their life, you know. For some people it's a lot younger than others. Some people it's a lot older. But I've certainly, you know, I started kind of having these feelings like a few years ago, and now I'm like finally accepting it, you know, and diving into it. So it's my, I'm sure you can feel the same way. So
Yeah, you speak right to my heart, which sort of meditation from Sam Harris came to mind, which I think better defines this interconnection between all of us and how you want to live. Maybe you remember it. It's the one that you are sitting comfortably, as always, paying attention to your breath, you know. But then all of a sudden, pay attention to the one who's looking. Who the fuck is looking, right? Well, I'm the one who's looking. What do you mean? But he never explains it until later on, and you know the other conversations that are in the app. There is no one that's looking. That's also a thought. And that blew my mind because it lets you open up to the idea that it's not just yourself, that all the actions that you do, let's say this chat gets to maybe one person that needs to hear it. I'm doing myself a favor by that. I'm doing myself a favor in my own personal therapy because it allows me to connect with empathy, with compassion, with sharing this type of content. And I also get the opportunity to share the most valuable thing that you, Lauren, have, which is your time, which you missed the biggest honor of also. Thanks a lot for that. But that simple meditation of pay attention to the one who's looking, there's no one looking. That's also a thought. It still blows my mind to this day, right?
yeah, I will say that the app does they have a lot of great content on there. Like I don't mind paying for it. I also find that, I mean, you know this, when you pay for things, you take them more seriously. That's just the way, that's like I don't know, that's some law of nature, but you know, anytime you pay for something, you're going to take it more seriously. So that I certainly am like, oh, well, I better log into this a few times. So, but there is some really great conversations on there. And there's also some really great, just kind of like mini series, you know, there's a really good one on
yeah.
There's a productivity one. So I don't know, kind of stuff that, you know, it's one of those things that sometimes it's just hearing something that sparks you to think more about something down the line. And you know, that's why that after school channel is really great. You know, they just bring up things. You're like, all right, I don't really know what the answer is to this, but sometimes it's just like a question that's posed and you can sit on that. Like, who is the one that is looking? Who is the thinker? You're like, oh my God, it is a thought. And then what are thoughts? And why am I? And it can get all like super out there. And then, you know, obviously if you do want to bring spirituality into this or religion, that is totally possible, and a lot of people do that, and that's, you know, everybody's own prerogative, and that's a whole different kind of thing to go down. And you know, what is there something else? You know, obviously Sam is a very open atheist, and I would say that I don't necessarily agree with him on that. You know, but it's like, okay, is it the universe? Is it a God? Is it gods? Is it, what is it? Like, there's, you know, and everybody's going to have their own different thoughts and opinions on that. And then you can combine those things as well, which is really interesting. And I think that that's where a lot of people, you know, if that's how that helps them get into it, whether it is completely secular or it is tied to a more religious foundation, I think everybody can benefit from this.
And just to finish up, I want to be super respectful of your time as always. I wanted to ask you on your social media break, why did you decide it? Or how often do you do them? What do you learn from that? Do you see social media on a different light? How's your experience in that, Laurin?
So I would say that I definitely, like, last year was the first time that I really took like I said, when I take these breaks, it's not like, oh, I wasn't on here for a day or two. Like, it's like I delete the app. I'm not consuming. I'm not creating. I'm doing nothing. I mean, I was still doing our podcast and all that kind of stuff, but not anything for my own personal stuff. You know, we have an app coming out in hopefully. So
that's pretty cool.
So I've been working on that, and I was kind of behind with all that. And then I was, I was kind of tying up some other writing projects and some traveling and just some own personal stuff that I've been navigating. So there was just like a lot that was going on. I was like, I really feel like I need another one of these breaks, because again, it's not just the create, it's, you have to create, and then it's like the consumption, and then it's the staying on top of it. And it's just a whole loop, and then very, I guess serendipitously, another project came up for me like the day after I said, hey, I'm doing the social media break. Another very intensive writing project came up for me, and I was like, wow, knock out actually a lot of this and the app stuff in those 3 weeks. So that was really nice to be able to just completely detach from everything and be able to really focus on that. Obviously give it the same amount of attention to client baseline. Like client is always baseline for me. That doesn't change no matter what's going on. But to be able to dedicate to the other stuff and really move that forward was really important for me at this point. And then to really be able to sit like this, I think there's always the initial, last year when I took this break, it was in like October of last year, and then this year was September. So I'm kind of on like about a year. Every year I really feel like I need this. I'm going to kind of make it a yearly thing, I guess. And I noticed initially there's a lot of compulsion. There's a lot of like grabbing my phone, opening it to scroll to where Instagram would be, even if I have zero reason to go on there. And I would notice, okay, let me be in tune with my thoughts. Okay, is this a time where I would be feeling lonely and I am looking for something? I'm looking for something to entertain. Like, okay, hey, I have 5 minutes in between something, right? That would be a really good time probably to say I up, a client update and I got 5 minutes before this. Probably a better time to like, let me just kind of chill for a second. But nope, when we know we have something like this, it's like, let me just cram my brain with all this information. Let me just do this. And, for me, it's being able to say, okay, my time with this because I'm lonely? Is it because I need a distraction? Is it because I, just want to consume something? So that is always insightful for me when I take those breaks to really understand why maybe I'm reaching for things. Then also be able to examine with more intention as to why I was kind of feeling that block. And I shared some of that in that post as to maybe some of the reasons why I was feeling it. Last year, I took this break. It was not because of that. There was a lot of, like, my whole personal life was blowing up last year. So I was like, I need a break from this because I'm just like, going to lose it. This was a little bit different. And I was like, I feel like I'm going to come to a better understanding or conclusion from this, and I was able to. So that was nice because I have just different tools now than I had then. I didn't have, wasn't using these tools at that point. The journaling, that I was kind of meditating a little bit, but the journaling, the meditating, the going for walks every day, like all of those like things that I'm cementing, the float, all of this year, and it has completely changed like my personal development trajectory. So I know it sounds like it has for you as well. The stuff is really powerful, able to give to that. And for me, my attention can be very, very sporadic. Of course, it gets very fragmented with all this stuff. So sometimes I just need to completely like go off the grid, like I like to say, and just put my head down and do stuff. So I was able to make a lot of headway with work, which was nice. And then also, really be able to reflect on some of these things too.
That's pretty cool. And do you think your mental health as a whole has improved by meditating, by journaling, by walking?
Yes, I would say that. So for most of my life, I'm somebody who's really good. I'm very good at avoiding. I'm like an avoidance type person. So when something comes up that's uncomfortable, okay, I handle it, but I stuff it down. I'm like stuff. And then and at the point, that stuff only goes so long and then it blows up. But so not really the best way to handle it, right? But then you're never really handling it. You're kind of just pushing it to the side. So when you start to recognize your emotions and you're less, dead inside and you're starting to feel things, that's very overwhelming, right? Which is the reason why I used to push it away, because I have a lot of feelings and a lot of depth to thoughts and emotions. So it was easier to push it away. So I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore, but how the fuck do I regulate this? Because like, this is like all over the map. So having these tools has allowed me to navigate that. I'm not going to say it's been perfect. There's certainly some weeks that it's like,
totally.
Not a good week, not a good day. And I mean, even today, literally this morning, I was like, okay, I am feeling incredibly like crushing anxiety right now over X, Y, Z. And before I would have been like, oh, I'm just really anxious. Okay, I'll just be rude to everybody all day. I'll just be, and then I would never even solve it to where I was like, okay, no, why am I feeling this way? Okay, because I'm behind on that, because this is happening later. That, okay, simple. Let me start attacking these tasks. Let me use this to center myself. And it doesn't mean that I'm never going to feel these negative emotions, but the idea is to cut the
Totally.
life of how long those are affecting you. And then ultimately, not just how long they're affecting you, but when they're affecting you negatively, how are you acting with other people? Because then when you're in a negative headspace and then you interact with other people, especially people who are close to you, you can just start shit for no reason, and then it's like, okay, that has a trickle down effect, because now it's not just about you and your negative space. It's about how are you affecting everybody else around you. So
Totally. I'm really,
yes, these tools have certainly helped me, and it's by no means perfect, but it is improving. And I would not be in the same place that I am now without them.
really glad you mentioned that to close off the conversation, because I tended to think that meditation and all this stuff, it was like a solution to everything, but it's not about that. It's you're still gonna have shit. I woke up with anxiety today too. It's not about not feeling things. It's about facing those things and learning how to cope with them, it's really maybe it sounds like little, but it can really make a difference in how you challenge your own personal challenges in work, with people, in relationships. It doesn't make you the best possible person. You're not a saint. I'm not a saint, but at least you know better how to handle situations, right?
Yes, and like I said, I think the biggest thing is just cutting down on that half-life of how long is this affecting you, and then ultimately how long is that affecting everybody else around you. And I think that a lot of people, they want to think, well, I never want to be anxious again. It's like, okay, good luck. Like now there's a difference of like crippling anxiety where you're having panic attacks, or is
Sure.
there, hey, I'm having an anxious thought. And I think that a lot of times, and this is something that I coach clients with who have had food issues as well, the idea is never to not have a negative thought around food ever again, right? Whatever that is for you. That the chances of that happening are probably pretty slim. But the have that thought, and then you say, okay, I recognize that I'm having this thought. I'm not going to act on it, and now I know what to do to move forward. So that's the same way that I look at, a negative emotion. Doesn't mean that you're never going to have these thoughts ever again. It simply means that you're able to redirect how you are, operating in the world with these thoughts, because they're going to happen. So wishing that they're going to go away, it's not going to help. So what are some strategies you can use to get through that?
So, Laurin, I don't want to take any more of your time. It also blows my mind, like I told you, that I can use this platform, Instagram, to talk to you, to learn from you, which I'm really, really, really thankful for. I hope we can meet one day in person. It will be a tremendous pleasure.
Yes.
Uh, Once again, thanks for your insights, for sharing, for being open to have these sort of conversations with God knows who from Mexico and stuff. So I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and always a pleasure.
Yes, no, this is great. I'd love to come back on. I love these conversations, and as much as I, love my social media breaks, right? Like we talked about, there's a lot of validity to them for this reason, right? And there's a lot
Totally.
that can be done on these platforms, and as long as we can stay focused on that, then I think that that's what's important. So thank you again for having me on, and I would love to do a follow-up part 2 to this as well.
Oh, sure. I'll be delighted. Have a great day, Lauren. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.